In 2004, Nintendo was weeks away from abandoning the console business entirely. Today, they are the most profitable gaming company on the planet, and Sony and Microsoft still haven't figured out how they did it. The story of how Nintendo went from the edge of collapse to dominating gaming is one of the most remarkable business comebacks in history. And it wasn't luck. It wasn't a better console. It wasn't even better games. It was a completely different way of thinking about who games are actually for. There's a name for what Nintendo did. It's called the Blue Open Strategy. And once you understand it, you'll never look at the console wars the same way again. I'm going to break down exactly what the strategy is, how Nintendo used it to save the company 3 times over, and why Sony and Microsoft are still making the same mistakes Nintendo almost died from. There are 6 things you need to understand. 1. The crisis that forced Nintendo's hand. 2. What the Blue Ocean strategy actually is. 3. How the Wii and DS executed it perfectly. 4. How the Switch refined it into something even smarter. 5. Why Sony and Microsoft are still swimming in the red ocean. And 6. Whether Nintendo can pull this off again with the Switch 2. To understand why Nintendo made the moves they did, you have to understand how bad things actually got. The GameCube launched in 2001 against the PS2 and the original Xbox, and it lost badly. It sold 22 million units over its lifespan, a number that sounds decent until you realize that the PS2 sold 155 million. Nintendo had gone from being the unquestioned king of gaming in the SNES era to a distant 3rd place, with a console most people wrote off as a kid's toy. By 2004, the situation was critical. Nintendo's board was having serious conversations over to exit the console hardware business entirely and become a software-only company, making Mario and Zelda games for PlayStation and Xbox instead of competing against them. That was genuinely on the table. The company that invented modern gaming as we know it was weeks away from walking away from hardware forever. And the reason wasn't that Nintendo made bad product. The GameCube was actually a solid console with great exclusives. The reason was that Nintendo was playing the wrong game. They were competing directly against Sony and Microsoft on the same terms: better hardware, better graphics, bigger budgets. On those terms, Nintendo couldn't win, so they stopped trying to win on those things. In 2005, sorry, my cat is here. So, in 2005, 2 business school professors named Wee Chan Kim and Rain Maubourne published a book called Blue Open Strategy. The core idea is this: most companies compete in what they call a red ocean, a market so crowded with competitors fighting over the same customers that the water turns red. The blue ocean is an entirely new, uncontested market space. Instead of fighting over existing customers, you create new ones. You don't beat the competition, you make the competition irrelevant. Nintendo didn't read this book and decide to apply it. They arrived at the same conclusion independently, from desperation of course. While Sony and Microsoft were pouring billions into processing power and graphics to fight each other for the 30 to 40 million hardcore gamers who already owned consoles, Nintendo asked a completely different question. What about the people who don't play games at all? That was a market of hundreds of millions of people, and nobody was competing for them. And here's where it gets actually insane. Because the products Nintendo built to reach that new audience, the ones their own executives thought would fail, became 2 of the best-selling consumer electronic products in history. Let's talk about the Wii first. When Nintendo revealed the Wii Remote in 2005, the reaction from the hardcore gaming community was mockery. A motion controller, no HD graphics, gaming forums called it a gimmick. Industry analysis questioned whether Nintendo had lost their minds. But here's what those critics missed. Nintendo wasn't building a console for them. The Wii Remote was designed so that someone who had never touched a controller in their life could pick it up and immediately understand how to use it. You swing it like a tennis racket. You ball with it. You point it at the screen. Nintendo was targeting the person who walked past game stores for 20 years because nothing in there ever spoke to them. The results were staggering. The Wii sold 101 million units. The PS3 only sold 87 million units. The Xbox 360 sold 84 million. Nintendo, the company that was losing the console war 3 years earlier, outsold both of its competitors. And the people buying Wii consoles weren't the same people buying PS3s. They are grandparents playing Wii Sports with their grandkids. They are families who had never owned a console. Nintendo didn't take Sony's customers. They found entirely new ones. The DS told the exact same story in handheld gaming, while Sony launched the PSP, targeting the same teenage demographic that bought PlayStations. Nintendo launched the DS with 2 screens and positioned it for everyone. Brain training games for elderly people, cooking guides, Nintendogs for kids. The DS sold 154 million units. The PSP only sold 80 million units. Same pattern, but a different ocean. What made both products genius wasn't the technology, it was the restraints. Nintendo deliberately chose less powerful hardware, which made both devices cheaper to manufacture, cheaper to buy, and easier for new audiences to approach. They traded raw specs for accessibility, and accessibility opened a market that specs never could have reached. But here's the thing, Nintendo didn't just do this once, they did it again, and the second time, they made it even smarter. The Wii U happened between the Wii and the Switch, and it failed 13 million units over its lifespan. The reason is instructive. It tried to be 2 things once, without a clear identity, confusing both the existing audience and the new one Nintendo had built. Nintendo took that lesson seriously. The Switch launched in 2017, and it was a different kind of a blue ocean move. Instead of targeting non-gamers like the Wii did, Nintendo asked a new question. Not if a console could go everywhere you go. What if the thing keeping people from playing wasn't control complexity? It was the friction of having to be home, on a couch, in front of a TV. The Switch removed that friction entirely. You play it docked on your TV, you pull it out, and play it on the train. You hand one Joy-Con to a friend and play co-op on an airplane. The hardware itself was the blue ocean inside. And the Switch was smarter than the Wii in one crucial way. It brought the hardcore audience back. Breath of the Wild launched with it. Indie developers loved it. Third-party ports started arriving. The Switch managed to serve the new audience Nintendo had built with the Wii, while also winning back players who had drifted away. Switch has sold 155 million units so far. It's Nintendo's best-selling console of all time by finding yet another uncontested space nobody else was competing in. And now for the take that's going to get me some comments. After watching Nintendo execute this strategy twice in 20 years, Sony and Microsoft have learned almost nothing from it. The PS5 and Xbox Series X are textbook red ocean products. More processing power, better graphics, faster load times, larger storage. Every spec decision is made with one eye on what the competitor is doing, and the results show it. The PS5 has sold around 92 million units since 2020. The Xbox Series X and S combined sit at around 35 million units. Microsoft stopped publishing official figures partway through, which tells you everything. Meanwhile, the original Switch sold 155 million units over its lifespan, and Switch 2 has already hit 17 million units under a year. It costs less than a PS5, runs on less power, and the combined Switch ecosystem has outsold Sony and Microsoft's entire current generation put together. The reason is simple. Sony and Microsoft are fighting over the same 30 to 40 million hardcore gamers who are always going to buy the most powerful console. Nintendo keeps finding people who weren't playing at all and giving them a reason to start. One of those strategies has a ceiling, the other one doesn't. The Switch 2 launched in June 2025, and the early signs are exactly what you would expect from a company that understands its own playbook. Better hardware, yes, but the portability is still the core identity. The Joy-Con improvements, the larger screen, the backwards compatibility with the Switch library, all of it says Nintendo is doubling down on the same blue ocean insight rather than abandoning it to chase Sony specs. They're not trying to out the PS5. They're trying to be the console you bring everywhere. Again, whether Switch 2 finds a brand new uncontested space or simply executes the existing one better is still an open question. Whether the Switch 2 finds a brand new uncontested space or simply executes the existing one better is still an open question. But what we do know is this: Nintendo has proven twice now that the answer to competition isn't to compete harder on the same terms, it's to change the terms entirely. And that is a lesson that the rest of the industry still hasn't internalized. So how did Nintendo grow from weeks away from collapse to the most profitable gaming company on the planet? They stopped competing, not because they gave up, because they realized the fight they were in was unwinnable on the terms everyone else had agreed to. The Wii found people who had never played games. The DS found them in a handheld form. The Switch found the time and place they were missing. 3 blue ocean moves, 3 category-defining products. And Sony and Microsoft are still locked in the same red ocean they were in 20 years ago, fighting over the same audience, improving the same specs, wondering why Nintendo is still winning. Switch 2 is already proving the strategy works again, and I genuinely can't wait to see what water they swim into next. Do you think Nintendo can pull off a 4th blue ocean move? And do you think Sony or Microsoft will ever figure this out? Drop it in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this clip, I was David, and bye! Have a nice day!